What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to thin out this black pine and talk a little bit about the contest on Bonsai Nut that I participated in starting in 2018. All right, well, this was a 6-year-long contest basically to see who could grow the best tree over the course of 6 growing seasons. Everyone started from scratch with seeds, and you weren't allowed to start germination or anything like that prior to the 1st of January of 2018. And that means that the end of 2023, which is less than a month away, is the end of the contest. And in order for me to have this, which is one of my 4 trees that have limped along towards the finish line, eligible to win the contest, I have to get this into a bonsai pot before the end of the year. Now, if I was really smart, I probably would have put this in a bonsai pot last year during the winter, or I guess I should say earlier this year in the spring. But I'm going to go ahead and do a fall repotting on it, as well as do some thinning on the needles and just make it look as pretty as I can, because that's all I can do at this point before the contest finishes. So as you can see, I've just taken off like maybe 60 to 70% of the root mass on here, and it's nice to work with trees that are coming out of pond baskets because there's just a lot of little teeny roots all over the place, which means that it's easier to pot it back down into a small container. But from here forward, I'm going to start combing out roots and removing some of the broken down soil that's in here. When I started this tree, I was using a combination of washed pumice and fir bark, and it looks like it's at least mostly done the job okay, but the health of the tree hasn't been fantastic throughout the entire growing process. Okay, and now I'm obviously paying for my lack of foresight in terms of root pruning with a problem that I should have addressed years ago when I transitioned this, obviously, from a small terracotta or something like that into the pond basket. It's a double-edged sword. You either end up with this and more vigorous growth up front, or you end up with less vigorous growth for a year or two. And because I was going for speed, I decided not to mess with the roots. So now I'm going to have to come in and cut all of these back. If this were an older tree, I would not want to be doing this, frankly. And with younger trees, it's not quite as problematic. I've been leaving the sacrifice branch on, but I might as well take it off now because I can't leave it on for the end of the contest. So I'll just cut it right here so I'm not struggling with keeping the tree upright. Given that this is a pine tree, that is pretty drastic, but I am going to go ahead and finish repotting it, and then we'll talk about the aftercare of this after I get it into the pot. All right, I've used some raffia to tie the roots together here to make it so that they're not all the way out to the side of the pot, which, you know, might look just as good, but in this case, I think I like the roots squeezed together a little bit more. So I've got this pot by Mitsunobu Ito that I'm going to put it in, and I've added a little bit of soil to this side and chopped it between the roots so that when I tighten down the tie wires, it doesn't just squeeze the roots together further. And I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit to this side. Now, because I essentially bare rooted this tree, I need to be conscious of not leaving, well, you always have to be conscious of not leaving air pockets when you're repotting. All right, and now with this anchored into the pot, I'm going to add some additional soil as well as just sort of clean everything up. So any roots that are sticking up that are obviously not going to live or haven't made it down into the soil at the current soil line, I'm gonna have to remove because it's just not going to work in terms of keeping them alive. The other thing I want to do in this particular case is to add some soil down, kind of starting where I just poured it. So up in here, I want to kind of chop some soil down into those spaces between those roots that I created when I took it out of the pond basket. So I'm going to go through a couple rounds of that. And as I do this, I'm using a smaller size soil. This is Akadama mixture. And the reason I'm using smaller size soil is really just that the large soil particles won't get in between the roots quite as effectively as the small size soil. And I want to make sure that I keep as many of the remaining roots viable as possible, because that was a lot of root work. And with that, I'm going to give this a little bit of watering before I go any further. So I did a heavy cutback on this in the summer, and now it's got some excess buds and needles. So because because I'm sort of effectively preparing this for show, I don't want to take off too much, but it's looking just kind of fuzzy and ridiculous at the moment. So I'm going to remove some of these dangling needles, at the very least, to just sort of clean up the aesthetic. Now, if you're wondering about the other trees that I have in this contest, then let me give you a little bit of a look at each one of them. So when you're making trees, oftentimes you can sort of nudge them in a particular direction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be exactly what you planned. And this tree, out of the 4 that I still have, is definitely the healthiest. It has very large buds on the terminals here, and it has 2 sacrifice branches in place, as well as some very dark green, nice looking foliage and larger buds. Now, I did candle cut it at the same time I candle cut this one in the summer, and it just responded a lot more quickly. So the needles on it are longer from the post-decandling growth. This guy's in pretty good shape too, and I think it needs a bit of an angle change, or maybe a significant angle change. It's a little bit of an odd design, and when I originally did it, I thought that it would work out, but I'm not sure that it's going to end up being a great tree now. The base here is turning into an interesting sort of wider base, and I did this on purpose. So what I'm waiting for before I start potting this down and doing more refinement or removing the sacrifice branch is for all of these roots to kind of fuse and turn into more of a base for the plant, rather than just something that looks like exposed roots. So they've already started to fuse. You can see that the gaps that were right here are gone. And I expect that as the trunk continues to bulk up, that will continue to happen, and then I'll get a nice flare here. Meanwhile, I've kept all of these little branches nice and tight so that when this is done bulking up, I'll have nice short buds to actually work with. And finally, we have this one. You know, honestly, I don't know what happened. We had a heat wave right after I did a slip potting on it, but it was struggling before that, and it ended up dying on me. All right, and now I have my victim here finished, and I think that the aftercare here is going to be the most important thing in terms of this tree continuing to move along and succeed in terms of this very thorough repotting that I just did. So I'm going to put it outside in some morning sun in an area that stays relatively cool, and I'm going to put a heat mat underneath it right here so that it stimulates new root growth We're into almost the end of November, and it's still not super cold here in San Francisco, but that extra stimulation on the roots should ensure that I get some root growth without really causing the tree to start to grow from the top out of season. That wraps up this video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.